Viksit Bharat. It's a question of where India would be in 50 years. And we have made certain priorities as a nation as to what we need to do. So when we look at the implications for India, we have to look at it with the implications not only just of what's happening on trade, geopolitics and the like, but also in terms of the existing plans that have been set forth by our country, whether it is around the use of our comparative advantages, giving equality of opportunity, because at the same, while we keep talking about demographic dividend, we have to also bear in mind that the same demography also has to be gainfully employed. They have to also have welfare needs, whether it's education, whether it's health. So there are also obligations that the country has that it has to meet in the long term. So some of those will not go on a wobble because of all that's happening at the current moment. These are factors that will still in any case have to be considered by the country. There are many other important areas when I look at, say, in the investment area, the government would prioritize what we do around governance. In education, we have to also look in terms of which are the other areas where we have not paid enough attention to, such as tourism, because it's all interlinked, it creates employment. Increasingly with geopolitics, and as you know, even 2 budgets ago, the finance minister had brought out the issue of defense. But now I think that's getting a lot more priority, and we have to say, what do we do in defense? We already do a lot on technology, but now as everybody's looking in terms of securing themselves for a world which is bipolar or unipolar or multipolar, we have to also look in terms of where India is going to play to its strengths. For example, technology. What do we do in deep tech? What do we do in defense technology? And these are also areas where fortunately we have people on the panel who can probably answer some of these. The overarching point is that the momentum of reforms in the country must continue. I think that's something which is a given in this discussion. The second important overarching point is that India, in playing to its strengths, must recognize that we have a very talented labor force, workforce, and we've got to ensure that we continue to support innovation as we look for long-term outcomes. The third is the government is spending a lot of money on infrastructure, and while we have all become dependent on it, and when we look at our growth and we celebrate our growth, a lot of it is because of public expenditure. The private sector would also be expected to step up to see how they can contribute by way of private investment. Fourth is that manufacturing has always had a lag. We are very, very proficient on services, and the whole issue of how do we get manufacturing to a certain percentage of GDP in this country is a vexing issue that we have, and we have 2 eminent people with a background in economics who would also talk about it. And of course, in a sense, I'm sure we will touch many sectors in which you guys are interested. So to help me with all this are 5 panelists, Professor Nagesh Kumar, Professor Sudipto Mandal, Nishant Arya, Ipsita Dasgupta, and Tapan Singhal. So with that, I would probably go back and relax and start asking them to make a round and do a round robin to first give them a few minutes to speak, and then we will get back to a healthy panel discussion. Thank you. So can I start with you, Professor Nagesh?
Thank you, Chair. It's a privilege to be part of the CII Annual Business Summit and this very interesting discussion about VUCA or BANI or whatever you may like to call it. But I think the world is going through a very profound change. World economy, I meant, is going through a very profound change. And it hasn't started just now. I mean, we think it is Mr. Trump who has brought this lot of uncertainty, fractured trading system and all that. It started about a decade ago after the global financial crisis, the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And since then, this world trade and investment growth came to kind of a grinding halt. You remember the heydays of these globalization where the world trade and investment used to grow at the annual rate of about 20%. And so people just thought the sky is the limit. You produce and export and we are, better off. But then came this Lehman Brothers collapse and global financial crisis. The countries became very inward oriented. They started to pursue industrial policy. And so Trump is a very recent disturbing upheaval. But before that, the kind of industrial policy, it was not getting the too much of attention, but there was this trend of Mr. Biden administration bringing in 2022 three acts, the Chips and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Infrastructure and Employment Act. Three together put on the table $1.2 trillion, or more than that actually, to be given to industry in the form of tax breaks and subsidies to revive industrial sector, or manufacturing sector in the United States. And there was a domino effect. European Union countries started to follow a very similar kind of policies. There were also very high tariffs imposed on China and few other countries to give protection to the domestic manufacturing. And Mr. Trump has taken this process to another level. And that is why it is far more disruptive, because he has put aside the MFN. He is putting tariffs on virtually everything, on every country and everything. So the principle of comparative advantage that we grew reading about as economists, and my fellow economist Sudipto Mandal is there, so has been put on the, thrown out of the window. So world markets are effectively getting closed. The trade, you cannot, look at trade anymore and rely on it as an engine of growth. The other thing which has also become very important mega trend is the domination of supply chains of virtually everything by one country, that is China. So look at, they used to be very dominant players of steel, aluminium, cement and all that, but the domination of the new industries, whether it is solar photovoltaic cells or the electric vehicles or the batteries that go into these vehicles, wind turbines, and all of these new age industries, laptops, semiconductors, the mobile phones. So 75-85% of these things, the global productive capacity they have got. And now the world markets getting close to them, what will they do? They will resort to dumping in countries around them and beyond. So India is one of the targets, and we need to pay attention to that. So guard against the dumping. Mr. Chairman mentioned a very important thing, that India is endowed with a very large domestic market and very youthful workforce. This is something of a very big opportunity for India to use its own domestic market and its own domestic talent, youthful workforce, and the urbanization and the government, focusing on capex to close the infrastructure gaps. So this is a great opportunity to build ourselves up, India up, and be Viksit Bharat. So that vision, I think, is the time. It is the time to focus on. And so I think Indian industry needs to look at what it can do to take this process forward, this momentum forward, and without bothering too much about this global disruption which is happening, because we have some domestic stimulus of growth with us, which we can harness and leverage. And there, I think what is most disturbing is when you go to a shopping mall and you find all of these small stuff, low technology, labor intensive stuff, all made in China. How on earth some of the best Indian brands are selling shirts made in China? Why can't they be made in India? They were made in India for thousands of years. India is a nation which was before colonization, also in the ancient times, best producer of the textiles and garments. So this is what is very disturbing, that we have become over time a trading nation, trading companies, and importing everything, outsourcing everything to other countries and creating jobs there. Today, even the world's biggest economy and most powerful and richest economy is trying to revive manufacturing back, onshoring of the business back. Why does India not do that? And so this is one thing I want to draw your attention to. The other is, that when you try to build in manufacturing, a lot of other things will need to be done. And one is, of course, we always say there is innovation which is not happening in the country, which should happen. Access to technology is critical and we should generate it here. Increasingly, it will become very difficult to access technology from other countries as this protectionism, builds up. And then startups and access to critical minerals is going to be again a major barrier. So we should invest in building the endowments of critical minerals, set up partnership deals with other countries. And the final thing I want to say is that, like India, there are many other countries. I have just returned from a trip to Europe. There is a lot of interest in building alternate supply chains, and there we can set up partnerships of win-win nature. They have advanced technology, but their production costs are simply too high to be, competitive. We have, that production capacity and produce at competitive prices. So building these alternate supply chains through the productive, partnerships or economic partnerships arrangements with Europe, UK, Japan, and Korea. And, because world certainly needs alternate supply chains. You can't have a situation when only one country dominates these supply chains the way it has come to dominate. So I'll stop here and maybe we can come back to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nagesh. We will get back to it certainly. And over to you, Professor Sudipta.
Thank you, Chair, and let me take this opportunity also to thank CII for inviting me to this very interesting panel discussion. So VUCA, as the Chair said, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This is an excellent way of describing the world which we are living in today. This is the post-Trump, second coming of Trump world. However, it would be unfair, I think, to Mr. Trump to imagine that all our problems today really began with his disruptive second term. We have generative AI now rapidly changing the way we live and work. This is nothing to do with Mr. Trump, it happened long before. There are two wars going on in Ukraine and Gaza, again preceding Trump. There are civil wars going on in Africa, nothing to do with Trump. And there's been tension in the East China Sea, which is again predates Trump. So there's a lot that's been going on, which is not all due to him, but certainly it is true, as Nagesh was saying, that Mr. Trump, with his in-your-face way of doing things, has made things much more challenging for us. Now, to get our head around all this very complex and uncertain situation, I find it useful to break up this challenge, if you will, into two parts. One, the immediate or short-term challenge, and the other is the longer-term issue. In the immediate future, of course, the one that is facing us most urgently, all these announcements, crazy announcement, Mr. Trump, this huge increase in tariffs, as Nagesh was mentioning. But I frankly am not too worried about this. Because of one thing, based on this funny definition of reciprocal tariffs that they have used, India has come out with much lower burden of tariffs, US tariffs, compared to our competitors. So it's quite possible that when all this plays out, we might actually gain some market share for the US market is concerned. We may also be forced to reduce our tariffs. In that case, some of our protected industries will be hurt, but I think that will be a good thing for Indian consumers and for Indian exporters. So I'm not really too worried, and in any case, while this pause is still on, all indications are that we will have some kind of a bilateral trade agreement with them, and that would make life more comfortable for all of us. I'm much more worried actually about the macroeconomic effects of what's going on in the United States itself. Some of these measures that Mr. Trump has initiated has actually triggered the beginning of a recession in the United States. We have already seen 1 quarter negative growth, and most likely the second quarter also we will be there. So the question is, how will that affect the rest of the world? There are two scenarios in this. One scenario is that the United States, as the largest economy in the world, drags the whole world also into a recession, and then that would affect us. It could be something like the Great Recession of 2007 financial crisis, and then of course we would also suffer. I've done the numbers. I think in that scenario our growth rate go down from about 6.5% to as low as 4%. Well, it's something we can live with. The other interesting scenario is that if the rest of the world, other than the United States, continues to comply with WTO rules, and they increase their engagement with each other, deepen supply chains, again as Nagesh was mentioning, and so on, with the United States getting relatively isolated, and there are some movements you can see happening in that direction. In that situation, global trade, with this increasing integration among the non-US countries, you could actually find global trade going up by about 3 to 5%, and that would translate into an additional extra GDP growth for the rest of the world of about 0.5 to 1%, while the United States, continues to get into a recession. Now, which of these scenarios is going to play out, we don't know. It's too early days. We'll have to wait and watch. So in this situation, I think the best stance for India is to remain very flexible. On the one hand, comply with the bilateral trade agreement terms that we get into with the US. On the other hand, with other countries, continue to pursue WTO rules. It is like having a huge, free trade agreement among all these other countries, so that if scenario 2 that I talked about plays out, we will be in a position to ride it. So this is what I want to say about the short term. Now let me quickly move on to the longer term. Here, the big challenge, of course, is the way artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, is transforming the way we live and work, how markets function, and so on. The world is changing. Now, in this situation, and of course the big worry about this is employment. What will happen to our huge emerging workforce? Here also I find it useful to talk in terms of two, the short period and the long period. In the short period, we have at the moment about 9 million young workers coming onto our market, labor market every year. And these are people with relatively weak education and very poor skills. I think only about 5% of Indian workforce can claim that they have formal skilling with certificates, whereas it's as high as 90%, 80% in are advanced countries like Korea, Japan, Germany, and so on. So this is not going to change overnight. So what do you do? In the short term, in the immediate future, we have no option but, I think, for the government to encourage the growth of labor-intensive industries. And we have lots of them which are large and also high employers. Something like, on an average, for these half a dozen labor-intensive industries, you get about 25 extra workers per every crore of investment. So this is what you have to do in the short term. Whether you give them PLI incentives or tax incentives is not clear, but this is what you need to do in the immediate future to absorb this workforce. But this is a palliative, this is a short-term thing, as I said. The real challenge is in the long term, how do we remain competitive and ride the long-term trends with generative AI transforming everything and so on. There are two things that we need to do there. First of all, this workforce in the long term needs to be skilled. You have to prepare a workforce in terms of global world-class education and skilling systems so that you can actually be prepared for this new emerging technologies of the 21st century. But along with that, you need to have very serious investments in research and development. I have to say here, there's a large deficit, and a lot of this has the responsibility also lies with our private industry. Earlier we were talking about how she used to work for GE and was saying that to start a new plane, they would start getting a drawing book 10 years in advance. This is the kind of long-term investments that you have to make in R&D. And we are not there. I think we should do that along with this education and skilling, and have to say that for that, the government can play an enabling role, but it should not be in the driver's seat. That should be the private sector, because they have skin in the game, they know where the shoe pinches, what kind of skill deficits have to be filled, and that is why they should drive it along with their role in investment. And my final point in this long term, apart from these two things of R&D and skilling education that I've referred to, is we should continue the emphasis on infrastructure so that we end up with world-class infrastructure, and also have to say reforms in our regulatory policies so that the compliance burden of these regulatory requirements do not hamstring and straitjacket industry. We talk about ease of doing business. Actually, doing business in India is a very difficult thing, and we have a lot of homework to do on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Nishant, would you like to go next?
So pleasure to be a part of such an august panel today, and I think there could be no better moment than the CII Annual Business Summit for discussing such a relevant topic, where we are talking about VUCA to BANI and how each and every country and corporate and individual is looking at deciphering this challenge. What is interesting to understand is that majority of the people today see this as a challenge, but I personally feel that is a huge opportunity which is given to us as a country to emerge stronger, to really see that how we as a country can become a global player whilst we are in the midst of these challenges, how the geopolitical risks are really changing the whole fabric and the framework, and companies can really focus on creating a long-term strategy with a medium-term outlook and short-term and long-term actions. So that is going to be the most critical enabler for us, where I feel that India as a country must really recalibrate its economic playbook. Because today manufacturing is about 15% of our national GDP. And when we look at seeing that manufacturing should grow, creating jobs, I think definitely we are looking for areas which are having much higher value addition, whether we talk about semiconductor. We see now a big focus on defense with the current circumstances, how countries in Europe have set up a big target in defense, about $500 billion of investment in the coming years. And the recent initiatives around the free trade agreements which India has done with UK being the latest one, before that with UAE, with Australia, and there are many others to follow on. So that will give opportunity for companies to really see that how are they able to look at the global landscape and focus on sectors with this value addition clearly. And these are all sunrise sectors where the technology is very fast evolving. So there is no legacy support which we need, so we can start from scratch. We can really see that we are getting the best minds from all over the world to India, and vice versa, how Indian companies who have achieved a certain scale and size are able to acquire and establish themselves in different countries. And when we talk about Global South, India is today the most relevant and emerging economy in the Global South to be the Global South. Just last year, when a few of us were traveling with the Honorable Prime Minister in Europe, so we understood and saw that many countries and many good companies in Europe are looking at setting up their base in India for manufacturing, not only for catering to India as a market, but using it as a base for the whole Global South. So I think these kind of opportunities exist for companies to really understand how we are able to look beyond the boundaries, how are we setting up the kind of scale and competitiveness which is required today in this uncertainty, in these vulnerability times, where we are able to redefine the economics and we are able to really keep ourselves very nimble and agile to see that how the geopolitical risks are short term or medium term, but we are thinking much longer term and investing into this for creating long-term value proposition. Alongside that, as a country, we have to protect our own institutions, and also we have to look at our own economy. So I think the focus on energy transition which we have today with respect to green energy, whether in solar, other kinds of renewable energy, nuclear energy, is a very important area where we need to set up local manufacturing, and definitely on solar front we have been able to propel this, but in the other areas also I think we can become the global powerhouse. Like I personally believe in the area of electric vehicles, India has definitely been able to take the right strides going forward, and we have the capacity to become the EV capital of the world. How we are able to do that with the whole ecosystem approach, we are able to really focus on other areas like semiconductors. Like we have a very good capacity and capability on software, hardware, firmware. Different technologies coupled together can make us leaders in these different sectors. And innovation-led approach focusing on human capital development. So I think that capacity building and human capital focus on a constant basis, that how our institutions are able to develop and build engineers and other professionals who are able to take up these tasks to redefine the India of tomorrow is very important, and that can't be short term. So that is why at least next 20 to 30 years is the run-up which we need to see, because many of these are long gestation projects where private sector and the government would have to work hand in hand for things to grow further. And definitely such focuses would be very important to have the right enablers like ESG today. Many of us see ESG as a compliance, but I personally feel that today ESG is very critical and is becoming the hygiene and the way we look at things, to drive efficiency, to drive effectiveness, and more than that, adaptability. How we are able to adapt ourselves in this BANI VUCA world to be able to be resilient and very focused in our approach on the longer term. So with this in mind, and the kind of focus which we can have on global integration, because global integration as well as our strategic autonomy as a country both need to go hand in hand very clearly, because if that doesn't happen, we would be quite dependent upon our internal markets. But if we are relevant for the global markets and if we are able to contribute in the same sphere, I think that will be a big game changer. So many of these key initiatives have been taken, but I think what got us here will not take us there in the future, so a lot more has to be done. And we really need to see that how a very clear perspective for laying the foundation of such key focus areas is something which would be redefining the India of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, Nishant. Over to you, Ipsita.
Thank you. I'm going to demonstrate the unpredictability of VUCA by staying in my seat to give you my comments. So I agree with everything that's been said so far, and a lot of the focus has been on specific areas that we should focus on, whether it's industry, education, building skills, workforce, etc. I'm going to approach this a little bit differently and suggest that we think about 3 traits that we need to have in this world of VUCA. And VUCA is clearly the new normal, and I completely agree with the earlier comments that VUCA didn't just show up last year. VUCA has been something we've been talking about for decades. But more importantly, since COVID, we have repeatedly seen a world that's had to adapt to very, very different things than we've been used to in the past. So VUCA is the new normal, and VUCA is here to stay. And I also agree with another statement that was made, that it really, when you have uncertainty, it allows the emergence of greatness. Because uncertainty and unpredictability forces you to think harder. Whether you do it as a country, whether you do it as a business, or you do it as an individual leader, it allows you to create and it allows you to innovate. So what are the traits? I was thinking about this as I was thinking about my speaking points to start off with. What are the traits that I think are really important to have in this new normal that we're discussing? One, clearly, and COVID showed this to us, is adaptability. The ability to adapt to a world that is different from anything that we have seen before. The ability to skill, reskill, and upskill as necessary. The second one is to be more outcome-based than execution-focused. One of the comments made earlier, I think it was from Sudipto, was about the fact that we have 9 million, I think he said, people who become employable every single year, and what a small percentage of them are actually truly qualified. I'll throw out another statistic. 1.5 million engineers graduate in India every year. 90% of them are unemployable as engineers. Let me just repeat that number. 90% of them are unemployable as engineers. That's clearly an example of where we have been execution-focused and not outcome-based. And as we head into this world where expertise will matter, who moves fast will matter, how quickly we fail and pivot will matter, being outcome-based will be much, much more important than being execution-focused. And I also say this because if you think about countries like China, China had the luxury of 2 decades to build itself. 2 decades to start off with execution as focus and then improve gradually over time when the rest of the world could not compete. We don't have that advantage. We already have China existing. We already have multiple parts of the world that are going to do all the things that we need to do as well. And the third trait, in my mind, is self-sufficiency. And I'll add another piece to that, which is modularity. You know, one of the conversations that we were having in the speaker room before we came out was how long does it take to build an aircraft engine or a plane? The expertise it requires, and for any of you who got on a flight to come here today, I know you feel the same way. Quality matters more than anything else. It's the modularity of the expertise, the ability to break that aircraft into multiple pieces and deliver what you make best. So both self-sufficiency and modularity is going to matter in the world that we are in today and the world that we're going into. So with these traits, what do we need to do? In my mind, again, to keep it simple, I think we need to do 3 things. First, we need to create ecosystem plays. It's no longer going to be good enough to be a great entrepreneur, a great business leader, a great government official. We're going to need to do everything at the same time. That means, ecosystem plays means government plus business plus academia needs to be able to work together. Most of what we are going to drive as solutions in the world that we are going into are going to require all three to play, and all three to play well together. Second thing, I think the US has done this brilliantly, and actually we're starting to see issues around this in the university systems. But if you look at the reinforcing loop that the United States has created between academia, talent, and funding, that loop has been reinforcing and self-enforcing for decades. It's driven most of what we experience today. If you have a complicated illness, you're largely depending on a US academic institution to have come up with the research to drive your treatment. Multiple other things like that, whether we're looking at technology, the internet, aircraft, defense, building out that reinforcing loop of capital, academia, and talent, and making sure that they work in a loop is going to be a really important part of what we do next. And then finally, something that actually we are really good at, probably better at than anyone else in the world, which is localizing technology to suit our needs. We have figured out what we want to do with technology, whether it's the tech stack we've built in the country, whether it's mobility and the mobile phone and the way we've used it. And one of the most fascinating things is countries across the world have been surveyed on how people perceive AI. And India showed itself to be the most optimistic about AI and to truly believe that AI will serve us. If you look at most Western countries, they believe that AI will substitute us. But in India, there is a firm belief that technology will actually serve us. So the ability to actually localize technology to suit our needs and very carefully think about the role that technology can play, whether it's in education, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in driving some of these ecosystem plays, is going to be key.
Thanks. Over to you, Tapan. So, very good afternoon. When I saw the topic, it's interesting, navigating a VUCA landscape, implications for India. It will obviously be amazing. And I'll tell you a story, why do I say so. First and foremost, if something is there for 40 years, it is no more volatile, uncertain. No? VUCA is a way of life which is there. 20 years back, when VUCA used to be big in all these corporate discussions, I was in Australia. And one of my Australian friends said, you know what, why you guys do so well compared to most of us. And I thought maybe he'll talk of gene pool, intelligence and all. He says, because you live and breathe VUCA from the time you are born. So I said, how do you say that? He said, let's say if you're crossing a road in India, and we all do that, it's VUCA itself, no? Do you just, when you see a red light, just cross over blindly, like you would do in most parts, of Europe or someplace, or you're still very uncertain, no? Like whether the car will come, not come, or red light means a red light, or a green light means, a green light, and you still look around before you cross. Getting simple things done in our everyday life is VUCA for us. And let me fast forward this to the conversation that we have now. The world opened up for globalization, and then what happened? All countries which are living and breathing VUCA as a part of life, they started gaining huge, disproportionately to the countries which thought globalization and opening our markets is going to benefit them. And then what happened? Now they're talking of shutting down markets. They suddenly realize that this is not working. So VUCA for countries like us, which live and breathe VUCA at all points of time, is amazing. It's always very, very good. The second story I have is been following Formula One very, very closely. If you look at it, is not about just a driver who can drive very good on a straight road. It is about a driver which can drive very well when you have curves and turns. That is where the winners start coming from. So a VUCA world in which most of us live and breathe VUCA from the time we are born in countries like this is always very amazing. And it's perfectly fine, it's perfectly good for us to see that. All we have to think through in long term and short term, what are the big things that we have to do and what are attitudinal changes that we have to have and where do we see the opportunities. I think our focus should be clearly on where do we see the opportunities and how do we move forward aggressively on that and not at all worry about
what it is, because this to me is very, very exciting, the way I look at it. Now let's look at the concept of opportunities. Now let's look at, and I represent services industry in the panel, which contributes to over 50% of the GDP and constantly keeps on pumping that amount. And sometimes we feel very shy to discuss about that. No, India is a service-based economy, and it is getting more powerful by the day in terms of services-based economy, simply because in a VUCA world, when you have a lot of good minds and brains put together, it's the easiest business to set it up and scale it up at a very hyper speed compared to any other business. That's why we are doing so good here, and I'm very hopeful and sure that in times to come, in terms of manufacturing also, it'll start pushing up and getting done to that level. But let's look at some of the very simple, easy wins that the country we can do, which has a huge impact on our GDP growth. How many of us know that if our country had health care for all, or let's say insurance for all, be it from companies, be it from the government, our GDP growth would actually move up by 1.5%. No? That's a very simple thing, no? I said, let's look at opportunities. The impact in India, because we are not able to provide for healthcare for all, is close to 10 crores Indians going below poverty line every year. To get 10 crore Indians above poverty line costs the government 1.2% of GDP. No? Now just imagine that if we had that complete protection for every Indians, and so there's nothing like sounding very exotic, all developed countries have it, even countries like Thailand have it, they have universal health cover for everybody. It has a 1.2% pure GDP growth impact in just bringing them up. Forget about the impact it will have in creation of more pharma industries, more hospitals, more doctors, the entire healthcare space, which will actually bring in more manufacturing and take this GDP growth to the next level itself in terms of just putting it together, which actually put it together to maybe about 2% or so to the growth that we have. How many of us realize that if all the SME, MSME we talk about, and we talk about them leading from the front in terms of putting it together, but 90% of them don't have insurance cover, and when a catastrophic loss happens, which is happening very frequently, 25% of those who suffer the catastrophic loss cannot and are not able to come back to business. They're completely wiped out, in terms of bankruptcy. So those people with dreams of becoming the next big Tatas, Ambanis, Birlas, if you may call it, they suddenly, because of a catastrophic loss, get done, and 90% will have coverage for it. Just providing coverage to the 90% of SME, MSME had a direct impact of 2% on GDP growth of the country. Unbelievable. So just by doing two things, forget about every small thing, policy making, decision making, all the stuff. Just by doing two things, our country actually, which is growing, and we say is the fastest growing economy at 6 to 7%, starts growing at about 10 to 11%. The focusing on the leaking bucket in economic growth, I don't hear much talks about that. I think most of the talk that we hear about is pushing infrastructure, pushing, pumping in, and how do we look at, getting employments or the spending spree. But how do we look at what are the leaking buckets compared to a developed country or nation, which actually is still pushing us back? Because we still have very good growth, we still become the 4th largest economy, I think we're still very happy with it, and we start forgetting that the industries and the services and the leaking bucket, you put that together, which are pumping up the growth of the Indian story, which actually get the VUCA world as an advantage to us, is something where there should be high focus. And like this, I can carry on and on, give you very small interjections, very small thought processes, which drive impact on GDP growth of a country, and that too at a very, very significant level. And that is when we speak of VUCA, it makes a difference. I was the chairman of the Indo-German Chambers way back in 2014. I remember I used to go to Germany, and you see all the Mittelstands doing so good, And I was surprised. A small company, an SME, MSME as we call it, and Mittelstands obviously are there, and they were present globally. And in those times I think about Indian companies. Now obviously I see quite a few of them moving globally. There are hardly any names I could see that they're actually moving globally. And I would think, how come a mid-sized company in a country like Germany has a global presence, and large companies in India actually don't have a global presence? And then I was thinking, what is it that's holding it back? It was the entire infrastructure and creation of the chambers of commerce in all countries, and the attitude of the government and the enabling environment, which gives the confidence to even a mid-sized company to go global as fast as soon as possible, and the enabling environment to do so. Just creating that in a VUCA world across the globe and pushing us to become global players and not get limited to thinking about what we have to do as interjections here would make a difference. And we heard some of the speakers speak about that we have make in China, make in Bangladesh, make in Indonesia, as those products being sold in the Indian market itself, and we're not encouraging it to be. Why should we worry about all this? We should just worry about opening up our own strength globally across and putting it together. VUCA is our advantage because we grow up from the time we are born in a pure VUCA environment, day in and day out, in everything that we do, right from how do you manage it. And we are talking about coming from, because we have these sessions of CI happening in two places, Taj Palace and ITC. Then we said, if you have to come from Taj to ITC, how do you come? You take the car, you walk. You walk. It's faster. When you go from ITC to Taj, what do? Take the car. It's faster. See, we thrive in VUCA world. We don't have to think, ask people to do efficiency improvement, do kind of figuring things out. Naturally, instinctively, we are VUCA thrivers and winners in this game. My take on this is, it's amazing for India. Just let's get the big things moving. Let's make a huge difference in the country. It's not so difficult. It's very, very simple. And let's get this on. Thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Tapan. Well, I think in the interest of time, what I will do, and this, as everybody says, it's BANI, VUCA, whatever, I can also choose to do what I want to do. I'll sort of partition this panel, right? So I'll just ask two questions, and each one of you is free to answer, but my bias would be that anything related to finance, I would expect a certain side to answer, and on the technology, another side to answer. So let me first ask the finance set of questions, because I have a lot of questions, but I can only ask it as one, so that's my cheat sheet, because we have only 10 minutes left, and even then, the poor audience may or may not get a question to ask. So we learned a lot about the implications for India. So the two important things that we have to look at when we look at future outcomes, the outcome of those outcomes, etc., are going to be how much money does India have to do all that it has to do, and two, will we really play to our strengths on technology? So let me just start with all the things in my mind in terms of what happens on the money side. The first, and I'm just rattling 3 or 4, and then I'll come back to both you gentlemen to give me your reactions. The first is the Indian obsession with the stock market. I mean, there's so much money that goes into the stock market, and for some time now, I've been interested in looking at things like the Warren Buffett indicator. I've also been looking at price to book. It's still very attractive for people to come, though we say, moderately overvalued or the like. But the reality is that Indians like to put their savings into the stock market. But is it getting translated into private investment in projects that need to get done? Because it's one thing to say, I just put it in the market and I live with the market. The other is, does it translate into capital formation? Because after all, at one level, capital formation is a multiple of the GDP you need. On a simplistic basis, I would say it's whatever, 1:3.5 or whatever, but you do require, for every trillion you have of capital of GDP, you require 3.5 trillion, say, of capital formation, depending on which economist you ask. Some may say 4.5, some may look at it differently. The second part of it is our banking system. Do our banks lend enough? Do we need more private sector banks? Because I've always heard this being said, do we need 2 more banks in the system, for example? The third is currency. When we talk about all that we want to do, should we continue with this obsession about what we do on exports, or should we look at building more quality for the domestic market and then say that what you export is a byproduct of the fact that you're part of a global ecosystem? So maybe I'll leave it at that. The fourth question, which is my favorite, is always taxation. Do you think taxation should go down? But with that, I'll leave it to you two gentlemen.
Well, thank you. I think Chair has put something very challenging, a very interesting question to my mind. I think it is a major issue that our savings are not getting translated in productive assets, and that is a problem. And without investment in productive assets, we really cannot accelerate our growth rate. We need to grow at the rate of 8 and 8.5%. We are currently growing at 6 and 6.5%. So we need to, accelerate it by 2%, and that will not happen unless we redeploy the savings into fixed capital and machinery, equipment, and all that goes to drive the economy. The other thing we are not doing is I think we need to learn from Japanese companies or Japanese approach to this, that you invest in a company and when it begins to make profits, you redeploy those profits rather than distributing it away. And so in India, one Japanese venture which started 45 years ago, the Suzuki, you see how it has redeployed all its profits and where it is. So after the initial investment that government and Suzuki put in, they haven't really asked for additional money, but see the plant of that time and what is it today. It is a very, very big company contributing 45% of the global Suzuki operation and even a higher proportion of profits. So I think we need to absorb some of these lessons from other countries in capital accumulation. Capital accumulation is the name of the game. Actually, there was some time back a very big debate in the literature on what was the source of Japanese miracle, if it was. And some of the people said that it was productivity growth. The others said it was simply a capital accumulation. So capital accumulation in any event is very critical, and we need to really find a way to direct our household savings, the money which goes for speculation into productive investments, and also redeploying the corporate profits into investments. So I'll stop here. Maybe my friend and colleague Sudipto will add more insights.
Thank you, Chair. You had 3 questions. On the first question, something that Nagesh implied, actually our household financial savings rate has been coming down. It's come down for the last 2-3 years. And what has happened, in fact, is that the Indian households have started putting more money into real estate. In this case, really means residential housing. And they have the loan market, taking housing loans has gone up. So it shows up in the accounts as a decrease in net financial savings. So that's been a major change. It's probably not a bad thing in the sense that the housing, real estate market for residential housing is reviving and so on. But that's what accounts for this. Of the savings that are there, as you well know, there has been a lot of dynamism, and even the small Indian savers are now getting into mutual funds and so on, which did not happen earlier. So that's the story now, but I think we do need to get our financial savings rate, household savings rate up. Your second question about banks, do we need more private banks and so on? We started off from a situation where we had private banks which were actually owned by industry groups. And that led to a lot of problems, which is why we had this bank nationals. I think the wrong solution, that was not the way to go. But there was a problem which had to be done. Since then, we do have private banks now, and Kotak is an outstanding example. But the government has been very careful in giving licenses not to existing industrial houses, because that leads you into a misallocation of resources. Industrial houses will obviously first lend to themselves. So we need to be very careful. We've seen some of the scams that have happened, most recently in IndusInd Bank. So I would say on this, maybe we can have more. We're not sufficiently banked. We do need greater financial penetration in the economy, but we need to move a little carefully to guard, have the guardrails up. On the third thing, you asked about currency and exports and exchanges and so on. I completely agree, as has been said. We are such a large economy. As often mentioned, we are already the 4th largest, going to become 3rd largest, etc. But our per capita income is very low. And the way to strengthen the economy and the domestic economy is to put more hands put money in the hands of consumers, and I mean low purchasing power consumers. Some of the examples that he was talking about, Mr. Singhal, was pointing to the direction that if you have a higher purchasing capacity of low-income people, we could have a very, very robust domestic economy which depends less on the international economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick one, Tapan?
Yeah, because we're already getting short of time.
Yeah, yeah.
See, for me, simply is this, and we heard Ifshita say that 90% engineers are not employable, and I see it at all the stand-up comedians are engineers, so I get her point. I know they're moving to different professions, but my view is not that. I think maybe they're not employable as engineers, but they have pretty sharp minds out there, no? And if we have an enabling environment in which they can create a small company, then add to the, contribute to putting this together, I think we have a lot of innovative people in this country. Education is not something which is the only way to make it there. The sharpness of the mind, the basic infrastructure, respect of such people who even create 5 jobs, 10 jobs, glorifying that, enabling that, putting that together, would actually get the flow all. Otherwise, what happens is the large companies which get all the money in which investment you're talking about, the complacency, the market share movement up brings that complacency, and that is where the problem comes in. The problem comes in because we're not, how should I say, making heroes of the small companies, the ones which are now setting up, getting employment 10 people, even a tea shop owner, we're not making them heroes, we're not enabling them. We do that more, we create more entrepreneurs at a very hyper speed, hyper scale for a country like us, and you see the magic happening.
Folks, we are running out of, actually we run out of time, but if you will indulge with me for 5 minutes, including our magnificent host, the CII, I'll probably move to this side as well. Competitive advantages and the pervasive importance in this country of technology. I would like you to comment on technology and, the fact, I think we didn't touch really upon financial inclusion, though Tapan did in a way since talk about it, but the power of technology in transforming India, and of course the competitive edge. And I think supply chains, again, which is so critical to what we want to achieve. So if you two could just answer on those 2 points
Sure.
and we close.
I don't disagree with Tapan's point about driving entrepreneurialism and industry, but I do disagree that education is not going to be one of the strongest pillars and something that we need to double down on and focus on. And I don't even mean education just by saying we need engineers or we need people with bachelor's degrees. We don't even have strong vocational programs in this country. And we have a massive skill gap. We're the youngest population in the world, aside from sub-Saharan Africa. We are the country that is actually going to power the rest of the aging world. And we need to seriously address the fact that there's 250 million students today who need to be employable, who need to be able to find work, and who need to fit into the global economy. And I'll say one more thing before I hand it over. You asked an interesting question. Should we focus on just the domestic market, or should we continue to focus on export? And my view is that to make sure that we are of high quality, because the world is cyclical. There will be a time where everybody goes global again. If we focus just internally on ourselves, my worry is we will lose on quality. When we are required to export, we are required to compete with other countries and the rest of the world. And I think it's going to be important for us to be able to do that.
Thanks.
So I personally believe that, it's very important, and I think Ipshita also touched on that point briefly, is that how we look at GVCs today, India's role in GVC is less than 2%. And when we look at GVCs, we have a combination of competitiveness, which comes at technology and scale. So competitiveness being driven by technology and scale is a very important aspect, which is the biggest game changer for India going forward, because we have a very strong domestic market which gives the desired scale for any company to invest. But if they are not looking at the global market, if they're not looking at that scale and size, it doesn't really necessarily make them the largest company, which gives them a capacity to invest in technology without that scale. So they go hand in hand. And clearly, whilst that has to be done, that gives you capability to experiment, because not every single investment would yield results. But at that scale, you can experiment and you can really develop and focus upon new areas and incubate new technologies. Something which multiple countries like Israel and countries like Germany, Korea, Japan, and many others have done, and that is how they have so many technology powerhouses in the world. So I think that is an approach is very essential, and picking up few key focus areas and then drilling them down to see how India becomes a global leader with its camaraderie of strong corporates, MSMEs, startups, institutions coming together is the way forward, in my opinion.
Thank you. And before I close, I'll just do a quick wrap. But I don't know, we don't have time for questions. I'm very sorry, and we're all running after this, but you'll catch us sometime around. I think we are around for the next 1.5 days, I guess. Some of us came from Mumbai, but we'll stick around because we will, right? Yeah. So I think to close, there are a lot of interesting things that have come out of this. And frankly, I took copious notes, used 2 pens and everything else. But there are certain messages that I would like to leave with you. One theme that came out is the US is where it is because it has dominant global players. I think India has to look at how we have some dominant global players. It is not sufficient to only have dominant national players. We also need some dominant global players is one message that I got out of it. Of course, the overarching theme of short-term versus long-term, so I won't talk about it. The second is, again, the pervasive use of technology, which I will not talk about. The one which you brought up, which we've put on a bit of a short shrift today, but is important, is sustainability. So put a place marker on it. I think this is a brilliant opportunity for us to say that when the Western world is not looking so much at sustainability, considering the fact that once they recover, they will come back and beat up developing nations like us to say, oh, you guys are the polluters, forgetting what they did over the last 150 years. It's good for us to still keep sustainability #1 on our agenda. And as was mentioned, it is also good business sense because, like, say, for example, areas like EVs and the like, we can do a lot. The point that you mentioned about the fact that we don't have the luxury of time, I think is critical. We don't have 10 or 20 years or whatever it is that China, Vietnam, others had. We are not copycats. What we are going to do is in a completely new world, and therefore getting to scale with speed. The need for speed is, I think, something that we have to apply our minds as CII as well as we advise the government of India and others. Importantly, partnering in the ecosystem with the academics, with the funders and business. I think we probably have to look at what we do currently at CII on this and see how we can strengthen what we do there. With that, I just end this and thank you all for your patience, and I hope you do enjoy your lunch.
I'd like to thank the panelists for this very interesting session. May I request Mr. Venkatram to present a token of appreciation to the panelists? May I request Mr. Venkatram to please present a token of appreciation to the panelists?